The bottom line is people aren't so much asking, is Christianity true now? They're asking if it's good.
Yeah, totally.
They look at Christianity as immoral.
Yes.
Right, and that's been a campaign from an alternative religious perspective.
Satan. Welcome back to the Firebrand Podcast. I am Maggie Ulmer, and I am sitting here in the studio at United Theological Seminary with
Scott Kisker.
David Watson.
And we are here, just the three of us. We're talking about a book that has been on David's mind. He's been reading a book. Why don't you tell us about it, David?
Well, I just want to use a book kind of as a launch pad for discussion today. The book is called The Great Dechurching, Who's Leaving, Why Are They Going, and What Will It Take to Bring Them Back by Jim Davis and Michael Graham with Ryan P. Burge. And I was struck in this book. They provide in the first part of the book a lot of data, and I want to read just a little bit of that to set the context for the discussion here. From 1870 to 1895, church attendance more than doubled, from 13.5 million people to 32.7 million, as the general population grew from 38.6 million to 69.6 million. The net result was a 12% increase in churchgoers.
What were the years again?
1870 to 1895.
Okay.
Because this growth happened in the short span of only 25 years, it became the largest religious shift in the history of our country until now. What we have witnessed in the last 25 years is a religious shift about 1.25 times larger, but going in the opposite direction. In that time, about 40 million people have stopped attending church. More people have left the church in the last 25 years than all the new people who became Christians from the First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, and Billy Graham crusades combined. Adding to the alarm is the fact that this phenomenon has rapidly increased since the mid-1990s. What they call this is the Great Dechurching. And I think that there could be, I think COVID accelerated the Great Dechurching, but the Great Dechurching was going on long before, has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
Long before COVID hit. And so I would recommend this book to anyone listening to the podcast. I thought it was really good. It's written by two pastors. One pastor, Jim Davis, is the teaching pastor at Orlando Grace Church, and Michael Graham is program director for the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. And they're both evangelicals. Ryan Burge, who has gotten kind of well-known lately for producing data on church decline primarily, has a good book called 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America, added a few sections to the book. But I'd recommend it because, as Jim Collins says, you have to confront the brutal facts.
Yeah.
And the brutal facts are before us are that people are leaving church at an alarming rate. And the question is, what do we do about that? I consider that an unacceptable set of circumstances. So what do we do? And the question of who's leaving, why are they going, and what will it take to bring them back is something they address in the book. And I just recommend it to anyone who's listening who has an interest in the church in North America and Western Europe, for that matter, which is ahead of us on
the whole dechurching.
The dechurching, dechristianization, repaganization.
Yeah,
one can also say.
I do think that's what's happening. I don't think that I think the predictions that the West would become
atheistic,
secular were wrong, because people are basically religious at their core, and they have just sought out different religious issues.
and religious expression.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was on kind of, doing my theological education.
I love how you said younger. I think the ER was unnecessary.
Compared to some people, I'm young. Okay?
Sure. We'll go with that.
We'll let him have it.
A long time ago, back when I was doing my theological education, I feel like I was on the kind of the tail end of a modernist trend with the, like the Jesus Seminar was very popular and all that. And a lot of the questions for about 100 years had been whether or not, even longer than that really, Christianity is true. And it ran up against modernist claims that say things like miracles or divine revelation or these kinds of matters, what we might call direct divine agency, really don't happen. And that we have to think about Christianity in other ways or just abandon Christianity altogether. And these writers have zeroed in on something that I've been feeling for a long time, which is that the conversation has changed and that people aren't really asking those set of skeptical questions about the truth of Christianity. They are more focused on the question of whether or not Christianity is good. And a lot of people today are saying, no, Christianity is not good.
Yeah.
It's if we keep, the cultural apologetics, the apologetic move to kind of defend Christianity against atheists who are taking kind of rationalistic approaches to Christianity may be outdated now. And the apologetic move may have to be to show that Christianity is good. I'll say one more thing and then I'll end this monologue. But one of the things that I think Bishop Barron has really done a good job of is relating Christianity to not just one, but three transcendentals: goodness, beauty, and truth. He wants to show not just that Christianity is true, but also that it's good and also that it's beautiful. I think that's going to be the way forward for us. We can't just let go of the idea that Christianity is true, and at times we're still going to have to defend that idea, but really a lot of the work is going to have to be showing that Christianity is true, is good and beautiful. So I'll stop my monologue there, and what do y'all think?
Scott? I know you have thoughts about these things.
Well, I mean, I do want to be careful about confusing raw numbers with statistical, with percentage data. So I'm not sure that the percentage of the population who came into Christianity for the first time during the First and Second Great Awakenings is larger than the percentage of the population that has de-Christianized now. All that to simply say, not that this is not a serious issue, and that there has not been a dramatic shift in Western culture, and I think one needs to emphasize that this is not a global phenomenon necessarily. This is not happening India's government is clamping down against Christianity not because Christianity is not a threat, but because it is, right? So there's actually people coming to Christ, and that is disruptive to certain traditionalist aspects of that culture. And what we're seeing here is, I think, a rise in more pagan forms of religion, which is to say multiple gods, polytheism, which is the same thing as polytruth, multiple truths being able to coexist. And that is a vast change in the way Western cultures have understood what Western civilization was driving at. And that is a change that has happened since we've been born.
Yes, it
the
is.
idea that, I mean, that's what David was saying, right? The question was, is Christianity true? Which presumes truth. That's no longer anybody's concern. The question is whether having truth is good now. With the rise of kind of postmodern, which is really a form of paganism in many ways, multiple truths, which is the same thing as saying multiple gods. If there are multiple gods, and those multiple gods is the way in which society should be organized, multiple truths is the way society should be organized, then any group that claims a singular church, any monotheistic religion, that includes Islam, Judaism, Christianity, is by nature bad. So you've got the church back in a kind of ancient Rome civil situation where the dominant culture doesn't care what gods you worship, as long as that does not impede with the worship of the God of the state. But if you try and set up a God who is above all gods, a king above all kings, that is a threat and must be quashed.
This is why they killed Socrates.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not monotheism is the ultimate threat to the principalities and powers of this world. So the interesting thing is that I'm not sure that we've had a repaganization. Like in prior to the Revolutionary War in this country, very few people were members of a religious organization of any kind. And most of the colonists in this country were essentially a-religious, but intellectually deist.
Yeah.
Which is to say, I mean, the foundation of the American Constitution, was the idea that there is a truth, and that truth is that tyranny needs to be opposed, and that there is such a thing as justice, and what's going on is unjust, and therefore it must be resisted.
Unalienable rights.
Unalienable rights endowed by our Creator.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that the people believed in a Christian God necessarily, but they believed in God. So all that to say, that is a major change. And it's also what is undermining the foundations of our United States culture, I think, generally, right? The Constitution cannot stand on a pagan foundation.
No.
Only thing that stands on a pagan foundation is tyranny.
So, a couple things. One, this is funny to me because just yesterday, David, you were asking about the content of the book club that you sort of run.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are these philosophical books?
My book club that meets 3 times a year.
Well, you were like, are these books too nerdy? And I'm sitting here thinking, I think when you asked me that question, what I said is well, philosophy, it's helpful when there's a context in which people understand its application. And I'm thinking, well, here it is. This is the context in which we understand the real life application of why you think what you think.
So listeners, the book club, the famed book club, we have been reading Volume 1 of Socrates' Children by Peter Kraft. And I would recommend this series to you. It's real if you want to fill some holes in your knowledge of philosophy, which is one of the reasons I'm reading it. I would suggest Kraft does a great job of making these philosophical concepts accessible.
And tonight, David's making smash burgers, so I might actually show up.
True
I have to
story.
bribe people to come to the book club, but
We have cow here.
and I make a mean smash burger, let me tell you. But I've done it once, and they were super good. So I do think that some knowledge of, as Maggie is saying, some knowledge of what's at stake in these conversations. To understand what's at stake in these conversations, you do have to have some knowledge of philosophy. And
But aren't we all also talking about a rejection of Western philosophy?
Yes, I think that, like, you have to.
it depends on which part of Western philosophy, right? We're not talking about a rejection of Nietzsche.
No, I'm not.
That's
I mean,
true.
Nietzsche is a rejection of Western, of the historic. When we think about Western civilization, we tend to base that on the monotheists within Greco-Roman culture, leading to sort of medieval monotheists within the Christian tradition, leading to some of the Enlightenment who were also monotheists. And once you get to,
Or who at least thought you should act like one.
once you get to the mid 19th century, and you have the folks who are basically undermining that deliberately, like Nietzsche, who of course goes insane, right? Is this a philosophical direction one should follow, given how that worked out? Nonetheless, that I would say that's an attempt at a kind of repaganization, and you have all sorts of alternative ways of being born again now.
Yeah.
Alternative ways of transforming your identity that are very different from the way we in the Christian world have understood conversion. Your readoption, you're getting a new identity. All of these things now have alternatives within a more pagan, multi-truth world in a similar way that they had in ancient Rome, right? You could be reborn in a whole bunch of different cults.
Like in a mystery cult or
Any,
something.
Paganism was like, you don't have to pick one way to your earthly salvation. Pick them all as long as you got enough money. Yeah, right. Hedge your bets, right?
Yeah.
As long as you worship the state, we don't care what you do.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is, and I think that's all true, Scott, is that I think that because people have a little bit of a, I don't know if we don't walk around sort of with an epistemic awareness of why do I think what I think? People just generally in life aren't that self-aware, and so we have the fruit of all of these things, and we don't understand why they're happening. And if we don't understand what the root nature of the problem is, it's very difficult to discern an effective solution. And I think that we get a lot of people, especially in the church, who say, look, people just need to invite people to church. People need to do this. And on one level, yes, that's all true. You should invite people to church. You should share your faith. I work for an evangelistic ministry that does all of those things. But I think we don't, like, for instance, before the podcast started, I pulled this slide up. So this is, when we go to churches with Spirit and Truth, we give presentations, and Matt gives a presentation, which part of it is called The Problem. And in a way, he's trying to articulate the gravity of the situation to people in the church. And one of the slides, which never fails to make an impact, goes like this. Studies have shown that attitudes towards evangelism are declining. According to a 2019 study through Barna, almost half of practicing Christians in the millennial generation say that evangelism is wrong. So not just that they don't want to do it, not just that they feel nervous about it, they feel it is morally wrong to share your faith with other people. Okay, now let's think about this. Who are the millennials? Millennials right now are 35? The oldest ones are 35. So between the ages of maybe mid-20s to 35. Okay, that is the generation that is rising up into leadership in the church. And more than half of them think that evangelism is unethical.
But isn't that generation also, I mean, you say rising up into leadership in the church.
They're also rising up into leadership just generally.
Right, they're rising up into leadership generally, but I'm just saying, I think that's also possibly indicative because that generation is also largely the least church. Mm-hmm. Even, I don't want to quote something that's wrong, but I think even perhaps less church than Gen Z.
They are less church than Gen Z. That's correct.
Yeah.
In fact, Gen Z has a higher conversion rate than almost any generation right now, I think. But I think that the thing that always struck me about this particular moment in this presentation is that while this slide is speaking generally about Christians, those Christians are reflecting something that is thought generally in secular or in our sort of paganistic culture right now. And so if both sides of the equation think that evangelism is immoral, it will not happen.
Well, and the irony is, because evangelism is, from a Christian side, is conversion to a sort of monotheistic culture. Right? That's a threat to what has become the dominant culture in America, which is consumer capitalism, which assumes that your preferences are primary.
Yeah.
So Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all of which say there is a standard above you that judges you, judges your choices.
Yeah.
And your choice is not primary. Your consumer choice is not the most important thing.
Right.
You do not have a right to chicken done right. To quote an old...
That's such an old... You're going to have to tell people.
I'm super old. It's a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial. Let's be honest, there's been a lot... I mean, the amount of propaganda...
Are you even an American, Scott? Come on.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
We don't have a right to chicken done right. What good is this country?
Yes,
even?
It's not about our right, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's about, I guess chicken done right could be making somebody happy. Anyway,
makes me happy.
The kind of proverbs that have been articulated since certainly the turn of the last century, like. My truth, right? That is a phrase that would be inconceivable even to someone, a non-Christian like Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make sense in his philosophical world.
I'm just thinking about the people who are going to listen to you call Thomas Jefferson a non-Christian and how they're going to feel about that. But I
don't think he called himself a Christian.
He didn't,
so
but
it doesn't
that didn't
matter.
Stop other people from calling him that.
It doesn't. I'm letting Thomas Jefferson decide who he is, right?
Let him live his truth.
I'm just going to let him live his truth, exactly. But also, you think, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? How much is that a sort of proverb for the age? And who wrote that?
Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
Friedrich Nietzsche, right?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Unless it doesn't.
Unless you're dead.
Or unless it cripples you irreparably. Gosh.
Right. But anyway, I'm...
But part of the reason that Nietzsche, I don't know, I'm no psychologist, but I would bet that part of the reason that Nietzsche went insane had to do with the fact that he was pressing people to understand the implications of the rejection of God. He was saying, now that we've killed God, we have to live into the full implications of that.
Right.
And you can't just go along thinking that the world is basically the same kind of place, morally, ethically, politically, but without superstitious belief in God. Once you take away that belief in God, all bets are off, and the world is a completely different kinds of place than you thought that it was before.
Yeah, Kant's sort of idea that, okay, we can't actually know anything about God, but we need God as a construct in order for ethical life.
A limiting
and that's
force.
enough,
Yeah.
right? And Nietzsche just calls his bluff and is like, well, if there is no God, then all bets are off. Then what? It doesn't matter. There is no ethical. There is no good. There is no evil. What's good is whatever I can, through my will to power, create as the dominant culture in a society and suppress whatever is a non-dominant, a non-dominant perspective, something like monotheism can be suppressed then.
And for that reason, I think that the decline of Christianity in the West doesn't bode well. Or for that reason and for other reasons. I think the decline and we do see the rise of movements. They may not use this language, but they are based on this notion of the will to power and who can gain power, who is the strongest. And that, the inroad there, which I think Nietzsche perceived, would be violence.
Well, and you hear this even in the rhetoric and on both sides of the political spectrum. This election is the most important because if we don't elect X, Y, or Z or which party, democracy will end.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, what that sets up is my will to power. It doesn't matter how I win, right? Ethics no longer matter. All that matters is that I gain the power so that my will can be imposed. And that's on both sides right now.
Yes, it is on both sides. I mean, that kind of hyperbolic urgency. But I think that there is also, at the same time, something more subtle happening that I think because of the volume of the, that sort of sky is falling rhetoric that's happening, we sort of miss sometimes, which is that power can be exercised over people in different ways. And I think in our particular setting, one of the ways in which it is if very effectively exercised is through modes of convenience and pleasure and access to those things. And I think that it's still true that you can resist and resist and resist and resist to the point that violence is the only option. But I think in our culture that leaders actually, they don't want to do, say, for instance, what Hitler did, or they don't want to do what a lot of military dictatorships do. And they want to lull us into a kind of, anesthetized state.
They want to go brave new world on us.
That's right. They want everyone to just kind of be calm, be sort of like chilled out, and just worried about whether or not our internet access is fast enough, or, whether or not we can binge watch our favorite television shows, whether or not we can keep swiping on Instagram, and sort of I think it's much more effective for people to control other people that way than it is to put them in prison.
And make sure, no matter what the expense, that internet access, travel, super fast internet gets to the rural areas so that everybody gets their Soma swipe. There's...
Well, we all know how you feel about internet access.
I know.
So the problem is acute. I think in the first part of this book, the writers do a very good job of setting the stage and saying, look, we Christians have a really serious problem on our hands here. Mm-hmm. And we have to address this in the coming decades, or this is really going to get bad. And so what do we do?
I think that is the right next question.
Yeah. What do we do to address... One of the things they say, which I thought was extremely interesting, they provide a lot of data to back this up, is a lot of people who have, quote-unquote, dechurched they'd be happy to come back if you just invite them. like they haven't left the church because they're mad. Either they got out of the practice during COVID, or they moved, or something happened like that, and they would come back if someone would just say, "Hey, do you want to come to church with me?" Now, those are people who have de-churched, and not all of them. They are people they call church casualties who have been abused in the church and may never darken the door of a church again.
Yeah, so I mean, some of this is on the church.
Yes, a lot of it is
perfectly
on the church.
Honest.
Yeah.
The scandals in, of sort of megachurch pastors as well as in Roman Catholic Church, all of that has damaged the church's credibility for its own, and the way we've caved into crass consumerism as a means of, quote, evangelism, unquote.
Yeah, and
all of that has reduced Christianity's, I can't think of the right word, but the fact that we make this claim about monotheism, about there being a truth, and yet we are living pagan lives in the background, tends to give lie to what we are claiming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is true. But there are several categories of people that we have to be able to reach. One are people like in the low-hanging fruit, people that we could just say, "Hey, would you like to come back to church?" And they'd say, "Oh, yeah, I've been meaning to, and I just haven't gotten around to it, but if you'll meet me there on Sunday morning, yeah, that'd be great," something like that. Then there are people who have been hurt by the church, like very deeply, and that's another matter entirely. And then there are people who don't have any church background, like they have never been in the church really. They don't know anything about the faith, or what they think they know, they have absorbed from.
It's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. It's and so there are all these different categories of people that we have to employ multiple strategies to reach. But one of the things they counsel in the book is just taking a step back and approaching the life of the church with kind of a sense of humility and Christ-likeness, without any kind of triumphalism. And that, I mean, you laugh, but that's not something that's happened a lot.
Wait,
no,
the church should be like Jesus?
No way.
I'm laughing because it hasn't happened a lot. I'm going, well, we sort of screwed that up.
I mean, another thing they say is that we missed a generational handoff, that there was a point, and I think it's probably multi-generational, where the faith that was passed on to people who are now older in our culture wasn't passed on to the next generation very well. And that seems to be true whether you're in the main line or you're in evangelicalism or Catholicism.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of wondered about that. I wonder why that is, and I have opinions, but they're not based in anything more than my own observations, but
well, one of the things they say is that we really do have to do a better job. They don't use this language, I think, but catechizing people, just training people up in what it means to be a Christian.
I think, yeah, I mean, obviously we've said that many times on this podcast. It gets said all the time, but I think there's also something to be said for how we have handled discipleship, and how it has been sort of scrubbed of all of its sort of innate relationalness. I don't want to sound like a grumpy Gen Xer, but that is kind of our thing.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes I think about how hard it was to sort of feel like there was space to grow into leadership, or to learn how to do things in the church, like the sense of discipleship from one generation to the next. And I don't want, oh God, I'm gonna sound like a grumpy Gen Xer, but I think because sometimes it seems like the way that authority structures were set up in the church, there wasn't a lot of room, or there wasn't even necessarily a will to sort of bring people up and along. And so
I think that's certainly true in the current context.
Mm-hmm.
That,
well, especially with the professionalization of
That's
every
what I'm-
aspect of worship, so that, like, you know, having a children's choir that
Yeah.
sings off key, not acceptable in church.
so everything from that to, like, you know, being willing to sort of like listen to one or two bad sermons from a 20-year-old who's like, I think I have a call to ministry,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Like, I feel like for well-intentioned reasons, and also sort of reasons of wanting to collect power to oneself or to one's institution, there's just been a real sort of cutting off of that part of the church where it's like, look, I mean, think about it. Peter did all kinds of moronic things, and nobody was like, well, no chance for you.
I mean, I do think that is I've back, you know, when the sort of megachurch kind of thing where pastors were beaming their sermons out to various places, I even at that time I thought, this is a mistake because we're not raising up preachers.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm not. I also wonder if, at least in Protestantism, I mean, the whole purpose of parenting as a Christian is to pass on the faith to your children. And, you know, I obviously have not done that perfectly. Don't laugh.
No, I'm laughing because no one does it perfectly.
Yes. But I do think, right, that there is an aspect, the relational aspect of children being raised in a household and catching Christianity as badly and as lamely as it is presented by me, not so much my wife, but by me. Nonetheless, you know, I don't think we just haven't done as good a job as we should have.
Yeah.
Well, I never was introduced to the concept of spiritual parenting until I got, and I don't mean like from my parents did raise me in the faith, and so I just want to acknowledge that I'm grateful for that. But I'm talking about like spiritual mothers and fathers. I was never introduced to that idea until I got into the charismatic movement. I never heard of this before. And that notion is going to become increasingly important in the years to come. There's not going to be any evangelism on the cheap. I think the days, and they allude to this in the book, the days when you could have a Billy Graham crusade and you could just call people forward to an altar call and hundreds would come forward, those days are gone. And evangelism is going to be expensive, and I don't mean in terms of money necessarily. I mean in terms of your personal investment in people.
Yeah.
It's going to cost a lot. It's going to cost you your time and your emotions and your energy and sometimes money, but that's not the important thing. To invest in people is time-consuming work.
I think there's something else, and this is just something I've observed over the last few years of traveling to churches all over, and also just being married to a pastor and in the church myself, and really just having to face my own very deep, very real shortcomings as a person of faith, which is we don't have an effective way of addressing Christian formation that really addresses heart posture in the church. We talk about habits and disciplines, and that is all good, and I advocate for that all the time. But, you know, if the point of Jesus going to the cross was so that we would all have a regimented prayer life and that we would never miss a prayer time and that we would all go to church on Sunday and be on time and take communion, if that was the point, and it wasn't also that those things sort of, and the meaning, the inherent meaning and the disciplining and the mortifying of the flesh, if those things aren't meant to effect an internal change, then what in the heck was happening on the cross? You know, we might as well just go back to the temple system if it's about habit and identity formed through habit and not identity through heart transformation. God, when we come to Christ, he means for us to become different. And there are so many people who cannot disciple or be a spiritual parent because they are still they're the walking wounded.
Yeah.
And they don't know that they've been forgiven, and they don't walk in the victory of salvation, and they don't know that they have the capacity to be patient with people and to disagree with people. And the spirit of offense that is on some people makes, not to be condescending, but sometimes I just want to hug people and be like, you're actually okay. It's okay. You're not dead. You have wounds, yes, but Jesus is alive, and what he did had a real effect.
Yeah. There's a kind of a cynicism
Yes.
that sets in the life of the church, which isn't of God. And I succumb to that at times. I'm not going to lie, but I know at least that that's not of God. I try to check myself on it. Because I think it was Ryan Danker who tweeted sometime back that Methodism is characterized by this relentless optimism.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. It's an optimism of grace.
Right.
And
About what God is
can do.
willing and can do.
Mm-hmm.
And God can do abundantly more than all we can
ask or imagine. Yep.
And so I'm not, my optimism is not in human nature. My optimism is in a God who shows up and acts and does things. And I think that if we will take the evangelistic task seriously and truly invest ourselves in other people, especially in up-and-coming generations, but not only them, that God will honor that faithfulness and people will begin to come back into the church. I am not willing to concede that the inevitable path of the church in the U.S. is the same path that the church has taken in England, for example. These are different contexts, but also I'm not giving up, right? I'm not going to throw in the towel and say, repaganization or secularism or whatever you want to call it is where culture is going, so let's just, accept that. No, I don't accept that. I mean, I think that Christ told us to make disciples of all nations, including this one, and so we need to go about that work with the belief that God is going to help us do it.
Which, by the way, this is the fastest growing mission field in the world.
Right.
So there's something to think about. Like, we used to send missionaries to other countries. Now they're sending missionaries here.
Great.
Yeah.
Praise God.
Because we need them.
We need them.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Scott?
I was, but I forgot what it was.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I guess I want to piggyback off of what David was saying about the optimism of grace and the optimism in the work of the Holy Spirit. Definitely the church is not going to start growing in this country, not the real church, meaning the body of Christ, the community of people whose hearts have been transformed to yield to the will of the Father in their day-to-day lives. That church is not going to grow because the institutional church figures out a strategy to reach all the different people groups of dechurched, unchurched, not churched peoples in this culture. It's only going to happen as it did in the most similar circumstances in which this church has the church has existed, which is the church prior to 311, when the church just is the church, is I don't know what else to say, is aware of the presence of the Holy Spirit in its midst, not afraid of that, not afraid of being vulnerable to God, and not afraid to be truthful about what is good and what is evil in its midst, as well as in the surrounding culture. And what the problem is, paganism doesn't actually save anybody.
No. I mean, it will.
My individual truth cannot save me. It can't save me from myself, which is the biggest problem I got. So all these people who are pursuing their truth are just pursuing destruction. And unless the church can be a viable alternative to the forces of destruction in the world and in people's fallen lives, of which everybody's got one, it's not going to, the church, the real church, is not going to grow. Mm-mm. There needs to be a saving alternative to the destructive forces of the culture. And until we become that, and that's going to mean more than becoming the kind of, perfect Hillsong worship presentation. That ain't going to save anyone ever.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think we can be spirit-filled and reliant on the Holy Spirit and strategic at the same time. But I agree with you that we're never going to program our way into renewal of the church. That's just not going to happen. It has to be reliance on the work of God and divine agency that's where we're going to see church renewal.
I mean, I agree with you if what we mean by strategic is to say, okay, we've got to seek out places where there aren't communities and plant them so that there is a witness in that particular place for a salvation that is not available anywhere else. I agree with that as a strategy. I mean, this is what Methodism did when the church grew by 600%, right?
I mean, I think that there are all kinds of different strategic or sort of shrewd ways of looking at this task, and I think that I'm just sort of thinking about all of the things that have been laid out here in this conversation, and I think that for those who sort of understand, and I don't mean that to be, that's not meant to be sort of like a patronizing kind of thing, but like I see this all the time. We go and talk to people, and there are always people who are surprised, and we saw this all the time. Like before the church sort of broke apart, before the United Methodist Church sort of broke apart, people were like, "What? What are you talking about? What do you mean churches are disaffiliating?" So that kind of existence in the church it's always been there, but we need people who are willing to, one, walk in the victory that Christ has given them. We need people to be mature Christians. We need people to be self-reflective and honest about the things that need to be different in terms of internal heart posture. Forgiveness has to happen. Letting things go, reading your Bible, being a serious Christian, understanding the truth and doctrine of the faith. These things shouldn't be negotiable. They shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm not into that, so I'm not going to do it. Like, these are the things we should hunger for Jesus and for the church to be righteous. If you're a person who's at that point where you understand that this is really where I need to be, then the next thing you need to do is go find someone to pour into. Pray that the Lord puts someone in your path that you can love, that you can befriend and lead to Jesus. And then let them be. Don't, it's like there are also a lot of relationships where the relationship is about what the person is getting from each other. And I mean, this is just how relationships are sometimes, but we need to be as selfless and as generous as we can be and understand that we can't save the people that we disciple. Only Jesus can do that. And the more that we do that, the more other people will see us do it. They will want to do it too, because they'll see the fruit of the Spirit. And when you see the fruit of the Spirit truly manifest on someone's life, I mean, you'd have to be insane not to want that, because our world is so absent of peace and joy and charity and self-control. We can do this. It's not impossible. We can partner with Jesus.
Yeah, we can. And I think we will in the days ahead. It's going to require, kind of a shift in thinking in the life of the church. But that's happened before. I mean, we just have to understand the circumstances that we're in. And also understand what's available to us through the power of the Holy Spirit and the work of Christ on the cross. Mm-hmm. We don't have to do all the heavy lifting, like you're saying. God will do that. We need to make ourselves available in faithfulness to God. And I agree with Scott that the church needs to be the church.
Yeah.
And we need to be faithful and not necessarily not people-pleasing and not culture-pleasing. We just need to be faithful to Christ. Yeah. And I believe that Christ will reward that faithfulness.
Sorry, I sounded really grumpy there.
No, you didn't. It's all good.
Well,
we are grumpy Gen Xers, apparently.
I think I just barely made the cut. I was just looking at the split the other day.
I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, lucky you.
It kind of smells like Teen Spirit in here.
Oh my gosh. Well, that album did get played frequently in the angsty teenage realm of my house. All right.
It still gets played a lot at mine.
Oh boy. That has been our episode for today, you guys. Thank you so much for listening. We're really grateful for our listeners. Check us out on our social media channels at Firebrand Talks is Twitter, and we're on Facebook, so go check us out there. And we hope you have a great day, and we'll come back to you in the next conversation. Bye.